Hi, this is Peter May. I'm in the pinyon forest of Crestone. Our forest here has taught me many things over the last 20 some years. I got here in '93, and I was drawn here specifically because of the pinyon pine. Someone had given me incense years ago in college in Michigan, and I smelled that scent, and as many of us know, it's just one of the most enticing smells. And so I got here and I was wanting to serve as a firefighter. So in '93 I became a firefighter, and Mark Jacoby, I think, was chief. And we started to do our best to understand how to best serve the community. And we started to get training because more people were moving to the more wild areas, and we found that we hadn't really developed a wildland type of firefighting part of our fire department. So we started to get more training, and then we found out that the fire that comes from a wildfire is actually already on the land. And we know that scientifically as BTUs. So for instance, the pinyon pines have about 25 million BTUs per cord. And when you start to look at the landscape, you're going, well, that's a lot of fire, especially if you have it expressed all at once. So we began pruning the trees up, doing fire mitigation. And early on, we were told to just limb up every tree. And then we learned about that there's actually a healthier amount of trees that can be on a piece of land. So if you have a whole bunch of little ones that might only be about this diameter, they all might be 80 years old, but they're not very healthy. Sure, every now and then it's okay, but to get a tree like this is a 300-year-old tree. It has a number of burn scars on it. It's produced nuts many times. You're going to want to have it by itself. You're going to want to have it limbed up, and basically it knows how to take care of itself then. So over these last 20 some years, we've learned a lot. And we've also learned how to interact with the forest. And we've also learned as we've taken care of the forest, it starts to take care of us. And around 2003, 2006, we really began to start doing fire mitigation as well as improving the forest health condition, because the two go hand in hand. And our efforts are always to reduce relative fire danger, increase local biodiversity of plant and animal species, and improve the resilience of the land to disturbance, whether that's fire or flood or windstorm. And we're seeing that happen. I just went by the Willow Creek area yesterday, and we had burned that just as you go into the stables. And we had burned because there was no grass there. And if you go back today, it is all grass. It used to be just sand, and what we're getting as well is a regeneration of ponderosa pine, which wasn't there. When you look at sustainability and you see this tree, are there baby ones? Are there other trees coming in to carry this on? And some trees have a certain kind of frequency of regeneration, others have different ones, so you can't just apply it. So these trees have taught us about their gifts, and one of their gifts, when we took the slash, because we limb up the trees, we take out little trees, we generally don't take big trees. The big trees have been here. They're the historians of the land. They can teach us and the other trees how to be here. Like I said, this tree's 300 years old. It has some years on it. And so when we generate the slash material, the green, we would then distill it. In 2006, we did the first magical distillation and got pinyon pine essential oil. We've had this analyzed in France because at that time, they're the ones that knew how to do it. When you do a spectrographic analysis, you have to know what you're looking for. So we've gotten this analyzed. Basically, this contains 7% sesquiterpenes and 70% monoterpenes. Those help to feed our brains in a good way. And we also know that this can help heal and provide us with different kinds of healing formulations. to heal muscles, muscle pain, even severed tendons, necrosis, frostbite, herniated discs, when you know how to use it. We also have the water distillate of this process. This is the pinyon pine hydrosol. This contains 3.6% caprylic acid. If you look up caprylic acid, C8, this is the stuff that helps you burn fat. This is the stuff that helps you get over a hangover. It makes an excellent margarita. 1 part hydrosol, 1 part tequila if you like, but you don't need it, and then 3 parts lemonade. Best margarita you'll have. So, the trees have taught us a lot. And we, in the probably 2006, 2007, 2008, maybe even before, maybe 2004, we burned 400 acres in and around the Baca Grande. We got funded to do that. I became a type 2 burn boss to conduct prescribed fires safely. And we noticed that when we burned those 400 acres that year, and it was all safe, that we got an amazing amount of pinyon pine nut yield. And I had heard from different studies and from Dennis Martinez, an indigenous forest restoration specialist, that when you burn, and you burn with intention, like many cultures have done around the world, you can become in partnership with the trees, and the trees can then respond to you and your needs. This sounds like way airy-fairy Crestone, except that we're seeing it. So, in a sense, this is like, oh, that actually is true. And so we got this large amount of nut production. A few years later, we came over and burned on this section of land, and again, the tree produced nuts. It was like it remembered. These fire scars may not be from wildfires. They may be what we call cultural burning through traditional ecological knowledge. The Utes and the Apaches lived here for years, and when you go up in the hills here, especially the hills with the view and the pinyon pine nuts, you can find the stones that they would shell the pinyon nuts with, the mono and metates. Some are still untouched, but that's what they would use because this area. We now come here and go, how did they do that? How did they actually survive? We know that the pinyon nuts are full of fat, and they've got a lot of important nutrients to live here. And what we're looking into now is how can we be a part of this forest? How can we ask this forest to support us as we're supporting it? So we're learning that fire can do this, especially intentional, safe fire, and fire done with consciousness. And if we're successful, we get an abundant pinyon nut harvest. The trees have some wisdom to them. I think they can also teach us if we're doing it right, if we're really obtaining that consciousness. So in our endeavor to evolve spiritually, we have the best teachers right here, especially if we're in a dynamic relationship with them. Sure, we can sit and meditate with them. Sure, we can go over and hug them. We can sit at their base. Now I'm putting out there, can we interact in a dynamic way? Saying, hey, you guys have the ability to produce nuts. That nourishes us. We could even sell these nuts. I'm sure there's some challenges about harvest and things, but we have a culture very nearby that has been doing it for thousands of years. As some of you might be thinking who live in this region, it's not always safe to burn, and that's true. So we developed an alternative, and that alternative uses trace elements derived from salt, as well as the addition of microorganisms that we can make from things like milk and rice. And we can then apply that to the trees, again, with consciousness. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you may want to get involved because the trees are going to be able to teach us. And so this tree right here, I treated it last year, actually, early on in the season. and it went through 2 cycles, which is what the pinyon pine needs. And last fall, the tree was loaded with pinyon nuts. I treated another tree right down here, and it too was loaded. And both of these trees are putting on cones again this year, which is kind of unique because these trees usually produce every 7 years on average. And so we're waiting to see, will these cones produce nuts? And as we continue to get to know these trees, we also noticed that last year not every tree produced the nuts, but some of them would off in the distance, and some of them would be triggered by a tree that was. And it's almost like there are friends out here. There's little communities, and it's not necessarily the trees that are growing right next to each other. So we're beginning this project called Revealing the Hidden Nut Orchard, revealing the native food forest. And that has to do with communicating with the trees in a real way. And this is, in a certain sense, this is going to be revealing for us too. Are we really doing it, or are we just thinking we're doing it? Because when you get the nuts, it's like, oh, that really worked. Now can we repeat it? That's where we're heading now, because we're interested. We're interested in sustainably living here. We're interested in providing an increase of native biodiversity, like the 3-leaf sumac, as well as the currants, and they all exist here, as well as the other herbs and forbs that are native to this place. And what we might find is that nature has a way of responding to what we need, even though we might not know what it is, provided that we take the time to feed this place. And traditional cultures have done it with fire. I learned how to do that. I can share that. And there are very specific ways that we can do that through the training, like the official firefighter training, as well as what we have learned that's not in the official training. This is more cultural. This is more from the land. It's not from a book. It's not from the internet. It takes you being present out here. And then you get the reward of pinyon nuts and a healthier forest that's more resilient to when and if fire comes, when and if floods come, when and if windstorms come. So we have our pinyon forest. Most of us just see it as this, some even people call it a scrubland. But for a lot of wildlife, it's a very important habitat. Many birds live here and they use this forest. It's kind of like a meeting ground from the grasslands and then the upland forests. So here we are in our pinyon juniper ponderosa forest. How can it support us, and how can we support it? So we need heat in the winter. We need food. So we've talked about the nuts. When we go to steward the forest, we're often left with the slash material, and there's a number of uses for that. Like I said, we make essential oil. You know, you can get in touch and we can start utilizing that slash material, and we can also make it into oil as well as hydrosol. The hydrosol is also really good for people with candida. So the amazing thing about this is that when you start to get in harmony with nature, nature starts to show you how to use these things. And we're learning the uses of the oils and the hydrosols. The material that's left from the distillation process, the distilled chips, that acts like soil because the distillation process ages the chips 50 years in about 4 or 5 hours, and you can plant directly into them. I've grown my corn, beans, and squash, and this year I have an even bigger garden utilizing those chips as the only soil. And I'm growing squash and peppers and basil and, you know, on and on and on. And it's nature doing it for us. So we have the Revealing the Hidden Nut Orchard project. You can get involved with that if you're a landowner, or if you take care of of some land. This is also open to the bigger groups, and we'll start small first, maybe a couple trees for each person. And then we'll start to monitor, because we are revealing this. This isn't something that everyone knows how to do. This is something we're going to take time. We're going to be as rigorous as we can in taking our notes, and so that we know which trees are treated, when they were treated, if you can, what thoughts you were having when you treated them. You know, everything that we can actually wrap our heads and our hearts and our bodies around to see if we can be successful. And I think our biggest challenge with this project will be harvesting, because we really don't know how to do that. But I know how to get in touch with people who do. They've been doing it for thousands of years. And so the biggest take-home message is that we can interact with our forest. But first we have to actually put it out there and begin some kind of process to communicate with the forest. Even though we might think it's just a picture, it's actually paying attention to us more than you could ever know until you start to get to know it. So we have the products are at Windhorse Botanicals.com, intuitionsupport.com, and you can also see them at the kiosk on Thursdays.